Good afternoon, a warm welcome to Conversations. My name's Emily Butler, I'm the Conversations Curator here at Art Basel. I'm really thrilled to see so many people today who are interested in the topic of parenthood in the arts. Previously, being a parent was seen as incompatible with being a successful artist. Today, we're actually going to be looking at whether the increased visibility of parenthood has translated into the art world being a more welcoming place. And I'd like to start off by offering a real heartfelt thank you to our three panelists today. It's not an easy topic to talk about. Parenthood is not just a rosy period in life. It's challenging, messy, and hard, and it comes with lots of contradictory feelings, as us all as parents on this panel can attest to. So I'd like to start off by giving our speakers, Camille, Basim, and Andrea, a very warm round of applause and welcome. This conversation is not meant to exclude either people who are not parents. It's not about promoting parenthood as a requisite, especially at a time when many women's reproductive rights are still being challenged. And I'd like to shout out to all the women and men out there who are still asking for equality. And actually, it's quite timely because today is the day of the women's strike here in Switzerland. Care is one of the overarching themes of this year's Conversations program. How can the art world be a more caring place as its globalization continues to accelerate? And I hope our discussion today can also open up parenthood to think about different forms of caring. So the first question that we're going to tackle today is this preconception that you can't be a successful artist and a parent. And I'd like to propose that we think instead of celebrating the transformative potential of parenthood in terms of creativity, inspiration, or efficiency. And then I'd like to move on to look at the more practical implications that the art world can still put in place. For me, changing both attitudes in parallel with offering more support is the way to achieve positive change. So I'd like to start off by really addressing this preconception head-on by saying that I'm really thrilled to host examples of three artists who are both highly successful and who are highly successful artists and parents. Camille Henrot has just opened a show called Sweet Days of Discipline at the Kunstmuseum St. Gallen. And along with the artists on this panel, she works in many different media. Her work has a wide-ranging interest, from the banality to the complexity of living in an increasingly overstimulated, globalizing world. And I'll just mention two recent solo exhibitions which took place in 2021 and 2022, which were at the Kessner Gesellschaft in Hanover and the Salzburger Kunstverein that hosted an exhibition called Mother Tongue. And the catalogue for these shows is launching today at 5 p.m. at the Hattikans bookstore, along with another publication which is called Milky Ways, which is a collection of essays, which is also hot off the press, and which we will no doubt be talking about today. Basim Magdy is an artist and a filmmaker whose work tests the space between reality and fiction, probing the concepts of absurdity, utopia, and dystopia. His beautiful, I don't know whether to call it survey show, has just closed at Frag Bretagne, Rennes, just to mention one recent show. And finally, Andrea Büttner has opened an exceptional show at the Kunstmuseum Basel in their Gegenwart site. And for those who are visiting Basel this week, I really highly recommend it. It includes many formats, from woodcuts, glassworks to videos, as well as a very special performance this Thursday. Andrea Büttner's practice connects art history with social and ethical issues, from poverty, work, community, botany, Christianity, and philosophy. She also has a major show at the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Wesfalen in Düsseldorf later this year, and there will be a joint catalogue which will be published with the Kunstmuseum Basel, which will also be launched with Hattikans next month. So, I wanted to turn perhaps to Camille first of all. You have really addressed the topic, the heady topic of motherhood in your work, in your recent exhibitions in Mother Tongue and in Milky Ways. I'd like to ask you first of all, can you tell us how being a parent has impacted your practice?
I think I didn't know really how to answer that question because there's not really one answer. And to start with, I think that it increased the level of conflict, but I'm interested in conflict in my work, so it was in a way good material, but at the beginning it was just trouble, for real. I guess one of the things that maybe was inspiring in taking care of a small human was discovering how small humans are different from bigger adults, and trying to understand how the brain developed before there's words, how touch and smell are dominant sense of understanding the world. And I guess the experience for sculpture mainly was like very inspiring because I assume, I mean, my understanding is that sculpture somehow works a little bit as a substitute, a little bit like a comforting presence, but also scary, the same way a parent can be. And there's a lot of also physical experience that are driving my approach to sculpture. There's something about being in pain or about feeling pain or vengeance in sculpture, only also because of the tools you use, but also because it's a body and it's physical, and it felt like it was some of the experience I had lived could be transformed through this medium, and also the curiosity of dialoguing without words and understanding language as if it was the first time you were discovering language, which is also what art is, a new language. And so that was the inspiring part.
So in your practice, I mean, you've really tackled it in the subject matter, but it seems as though it's also had this transformative, it's created this transformation in your thinking as well, almost like shifting your worldviews. Can you tell us if there's one area in particular that you felt that Parenthood has really kind of shifted your thinking around your practice?
I guess I felt I was already feeling very sensitive to the topic of biodiversity, animals' life, relationship, kinship with animal worlds, and it increased with this experience because suddenly the understanding of time for us human is very. It cannot be very abstract. We understand time because we project into our grandparents or our children, or the children of our friends. And so the human life is the measure, and not really the years or the centuries. We understand the previous generation, we understand what the next generation will live. And in a way, having this emotional and biological link with the next generation is changing the way I think I would imagine climate change for sure, and the way I think about biodiversity. Small children learned how to write with A, alligator, B, the bee, and C, the crocodile, and all these animals are already endangered, and who knows if they're going to be still around or artificially maintained by the time they are 20 or 30s or 40s.
And maybe this is a good moment to actually transit to looking at a few images of your works. So in this exhibition, Mother Tongue, you've really given visibility to previously untackled subjects. For example, the question of breast pumping, lactation, as exemplified in this work here, which is called Wet Job, which is a reference to wet work, but also this idea of like the messiness of lactation. Can you tell us whether you encountered difficulty when you started approaching this, difficulty from your perspective, or resistance from people around you when you started tackling this subject matter?
I mean, I often work with the things that slightly disgust me or pose me trouble. So I was already working with the idea that it might be a trouble, and actually I was surprised by the good reception of these works. I think it also happened during the pandemic because my first child was born in 2018, and before those they were made, all of them in 2019. I mean, not all of them, but most of them started in 2019, and they were exhibited in 2020. That didn't happen. And so there was a delay between the moment I made the work and the moment they started to be shown. And also that pandemic, I think, brought a lot of attention to domestic work and to the value of domestic workers, but also to the value of care in our society. The nurses were celebrated. I mean, their clothes. I mean, it didn't change much for how much they are paid in many countries, but there was a symbolic acknowledgement of the care work. So, and then also most of the curators that visited my studio at that time were people of a younger generation of curator who maybe were also very sensitive and intrigued. It's people who had read Moira Davey, Moderator, or Maggie Nelson. It felt like a lot of writers specifically had already paved the way.
I think it's an important point that you're making, that I think the pandemic's given a lot more visibility to the subject of parenthood, as we've had more access to each other's homes through Zoom meetings. And actually, I just want to refer to a conversation that we hosted in Art Basel here in 2019, which was looking at the subject of parenthood, but more from the structural challenges, and it was called Between Production and Reproduction. And Chus Martinez, who's here with us today, was one of the participants on this brilliant panel. I wanted to move over now to you, Basim. It's kind of obvious, but we've invited you to represent fathers to speak on this panel, because in thinking about care, I think it's very important to look at both sides of the balance. So thank you, Basim, to give us this balanced counterpoint. I wanted to ask you as well, can you tell us if being a parent has affected your practice?
Well, it has affected my whole life. I mean, it affected everything. It's just the second you see your newborn child being born, and suddenly there's a beautiful tiny human being that can't survive without you. It changes your life, and it made me think about everything in a completely different way. I started thinking about responsibility differently. I started evolving as a person, because also children, as they go through phases, and with every phase you have to respond, and you have to be a different person to be able to deal with these things. But I think the most important thing is I learned to prioritize. I learned to understand what's important and what's not important, and to make decisions that are somehow influenced by love, because that's the main thing that kind of like drives everything for me. Is like, once I had kids, it's all about, why am I doing this? What's the point of doing this? Is this, the idea of the future changes. Either individual future or collective future, and thinking about what I can do as a person for my children, but also for what's happening around me. I think I realized very fast that I was wasting a lot of time before I had kids, and that I needed to manage my time differently, because as an artist, of course, you move, I don't have a 9-to-5 job, so I didn't want to waste more time by doing things and not spending that time with my kids. And I started thinking about my work differently, because my whole understanding of the world around me changed. So it influenced everything I did. It influenced my thinking of reality. It influenced my thinking of, and the most important thing for me was seeing the curiosity of children as they grow. It changed my own sense of curiosity. It articulated my own sense of curiosity. It made me think about how do I respond to their curiosity, but also to rethink my own curiosity, to articulate it, to understand that, yes, I am curious. That's one of the main things that make me think about making art. That's why I make art, because I'm curious about seeing things in a different way and responding to what's happening around me in a different way, and finding new ways to communicate ideas. So yeah, it was, I mean, and it continues to be a very interesting and beautiful process because it's not just about me anymore.
And in addition to making you rethink, we also talked when we were preparing this panel about you being having space within your work to allow the voice of children, the point of view of children to infiltrate it. I was wondering if you could perhaps refer to some works that might have been influenced by your children, and perhaps we can jump ahead to some of the images that you sent us. I don't know if you wanted to speak about this work.
Well, I mean, I'll start talking from the most recent thing that I did, where I involved my children, in, and it was the last film that I made in 2022. It was after the pandemic. I was thinking a lot about death, and I was thinking a lot about how to find a way to say all the things that I wanted to say about something that is impossible to comprehend. And it was a very difficult subject. And then one day, my older daughter came up to me and said that she invented a new language, and that it only includes one word, and that the language was called Bananish, and the one word is banana. And it's all about saying that one word in different ways to express different emotions. So I immediately felt like this has to be in the film. And a whole chapter in the film is basically based on this idea that it's using one word that is completely absurd to describe something that is impossible to grasp, which is death. And I didn't tell her exactly what I was doing, but then I showed her the film afterwards. Her sister was also involved in the film. There is a part of the film that's the film was shot in 60 millimeter, and there's a part that has an abstract animation, kind of like an homage to Stan Brakhage. And I had her draw parts of it and splice it and edit the film. Mm-hmm. And she was very proud of herself. And I think for me, it was also very important to in a very indirect way, show them that I take what they say and what they do seriously. That even though they're children, it's important that they express themselves and that they tell me. And if it's something that I can use, I will actually use it. So maybe we can show a part of the film.
Yeah, let's dive into watching this.
The following is a description of your room 2 days after you died. The description is in Bananish, a language invented by an 11-year-old, which only includes one word: banana.
So Basim, tell us a little bit more about this work. I was really interested when we were talking about it that you said that your daughter invented this language called Bananish, and for her this language worked with different intonations. And for me as a parent, I think it reminded me of the early stages of language acquisition when children start using different intonations and different sounds. And it's perhaps almost like going back to the pre-linguistic stages of life to understand this kind of incomprehensible moment of death. Is this something that you thought about in this juxtaposition?
I was kind of lost making this film because it was kind of a film about the absurdity of an idea that I know I will never understand, and we all know we will never understand in a way. And I was just really happy to find that she gave me that present. And I thought, well, I'm going to use this. This works. I didn't try to overanalyze it. I didn't try to theorize it. I thought it was just something about it that was somehow innocent but really smart. And it's a way of thinking that's not tainted by the problems of reality, all the problems of daily life. It's just a very simple but intelligent way of thinking. What if language was different? What if we could speak in a completely different way but still understand each other? What if a child could invent a language? I mean, that's not something that we think about. Everything is kind of structured in our lives, and the beauty of the way children think is that they think outside these structures sometimes. Of course, as they get older, they become part of that structure, but every now and then there are little glimpses of hope. And I just really wanted to capture that and make a point of showing respect for that. And it really worked in the film. I mean, the film is fragmented, it's in chapters, and that was one of the chapters, and together they kind of work.
And this question of rules and language and rules is also something that comes up in this work that's on the screen now, which is also a work that you said it's called Rules for Understanding the World. Is that correct? And that was also a work that really was informed by your children when you were making it.
I mean, I included this work because I was writing this list that I realized was extremely bleak and defeatist about. It's called 13 Essential Rules for Understanding the World, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to use it in a film. And then at some point, I had this 6-month-old baby next to me, and I'm trying to explain to her facial expressions by drawing these faces on tulips that I had on a table in front of me. And she started reacting, and I started seeing something into this, and I filmed them, and then I looked at the rules, and I looked at the tulips, and it was the fastest film I ever made. But also, it was important for me that now when she watches it, she knows this story. So I really enjoyed the idea of like that. Maybe that was the beginning of me realizing that, oh, this actually, life, like my life at home with my children and my work are not two separate things. They can be the same thing. I need to open the door for that and see what happens. And then there was this other time when I was working on another film where I made this film called New Acid, where it was about animals in a zoo texting each other. And I used something that also my daughter said in one of the text messages. And it was,
Is it kind of, okay?
Yeah, in this work. And it made a lot of sense for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I reached the point where I don't think about these things. They say something I find interesting and I just do it. I just include it.
And let's move on to one final work before moving on to Andrea, which is a work which is called Ping Pool Pong, which is also a work that's really looking at this question of revisiting the rules and the rationales of the adult world, which you've also mentioned briefly, Camille. Can you tell us about the process of relearning in this work?
I mean, this work wouldn't have happened if I didn't have children, because it helped me understand the process it made me look at how I look at failure and how my children look at failure. And at some point I was invited by the South London Art Gallery. They have a space called Art Block, and it's a space for the people of the estate that they're in to go and spend time and interact with art. And I was invited to do a commission for an artwork for 6 months that will stay there for 6 months. And I realized that it's very difficult to interact with an artwork every day for 6 months. So I thought I'd create a game. And I came up with this idea for a ping pong table. It's like a hybrid game between ping pong and pool and pinball. And it's called Ping Pin Pool Pong, or How I Learned to Laugh at Failure. And it was very interesting once we set it up. It has these interchangeable obstacles, and it has pool pockets. And I told the kids there are no rules. You create your own rules. And at some point, they just removed the obstacles. And they were like, okay, well, there are obstacles. Why do we have to deal with them? They just removed them. And then sometimes they would put them back. And the randomness of what happens and the failure within it became a reason for them to actually, like, they found a way to enjoy it. And I thought this was beautiful. Yeah.
On that question of relearning, I want to turn now to you, Andrea, to ask you, you've always had a strong interest in communities and social topics in your work, and I was wondering if you could also tell us how being a parent has impacted your practice.
This thing dropped. It's not a problem. I tried to live the life of Thomas Mann. I have 5 children, and they are silent during the day, and in the evening I read them the chapter that I have written, and they applaud. And this shows us that parenthood and art was never a problem, only for women. And I think, of course, I see a different kind of beauty through my child. And I like that I share that with all parents, artists, non-artists, everybody, that I'm, but apart from this, I think this podium is super complicated because we can see how we are being narrowed down through these discourses of care. I have to speak about being a mother suddenly, and there's so much to speak about actually in the world. Yeah.
So I guess within your work there are moments where the activity of childcare does appear. So we were talking about the art history of Bending Down, for example, which is a 2-channel projection that's on at the Gegenwart. And you see lots of different activities where people are involved in bending down and through sewing, through harvesting, through chopping wood and washing. And within some of these images, you also see images of childcare. And so you see the importance of juggling both childcare and labor. Has your thinking on making visible previously invisible forms of labor taken a different dimension by being a parent?
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe I speak about this image first, because...
Which one?
The first one. This is a reinvention of of a Capro performance, Sweeping, from 1966. And I tried to reinvent it in a way that 3-year-old boys would enjoy it. And the next image is also an Ellen Capro performance of parties. that I reinvented so 3-year-old boys would enjoy the LNK happening. But these are the only child-related works I want to speak about. This is a slideshow. In this image, the art history of bending down during labor, and I look at different artworks where people have bended down. And I did that work because during the Corona crisis, I went to draw plein air the white asparagus harvest. And I just wanted to look at how did other artists cope with looking at others bending down and doing work, actually, and why does it feel strange to do that now? And there are also some images in this slideshow of people doing training, helping children to walk, and collecting wood is an important subject, making fire, making streets, Courbet, connecting Courbet and realism to domestic spaces, maybe that. Yeah. And in the next slide, you can see other works that have come out of this interest or work with asparagus harvest during the Corona crisis. It's really that migrant workers were flown into Germany, whereas everybody else wasn't allowed to travel. Yeah. Bending down.
For you, the act of bending down, do you see this as something that's often been undervalued as an activity? Or, I mean, there's also in these images of sewing something that almost looks like humility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I even interpret it. It's just humility. I don't think it's humility. They do that in order to make a living, and you have to bend down in order to cut the white asparagus. And it's just an image that reappears in my work because I'm interested in nuns and they bend down. I'm interested in beggars and they bend down. And I'm interested in people working, bending down. And maybe comes from my interest in shame. Yeah.
And to pick up on this, your reference to religious communities. So you've a lot of your work has looked at specific religious communities. So for example, the Little Sisters at Ostia Amusement Park, which is the work that you made in 2012. And more recently, the Dachau Carmelite Nunnery, which is shown here in Basel. Has your interest or form of collaboration with these communities changed since becoming a parent? Or is it also just, an interest that continues its own path?
I'm still interested in communities of women living together without children. Yeah. I love the writer Fanny Howe very much, and Fanny Howe said in an interview, her ideal life is to be a migrant monk, traveling monk with children. And I would like to ask her one day how this is possible, because I think it's also an ideal for me, maybe, but I see the problem. So I'm very interested in this Fanny Howe quote. But yeah, I'm still interested in the same things. Nothing changes in that respect. One work I made when I was pregnant, and that's the next slide, is called Shepherds and Kings. That's again a slideshow. It's also not about me being a parent. It's a work about art history, and comes from this thinking about art history of poverty, and just juxtaposing nativity scenes, shepherds and kings, to be able to speak about the representation of shepherds as an art history of poverty. But so I'm interested in representations of nativities within an art history, but again, not to speak about my domestic life. Art history is very rich in that respect. Huh?
And these scenes of the shepherds and the kings form part of a Christian iconography, which is very recognizable. There's also other elements in your work. So, for example, the series of images of painted stones, or the asparagus, the carved asparagus that you're talking about, the architectural models. So for me, many of these works really have universality, but also really have an appeal to families and to children. I was wondering whether having children has affected the way that you think about what an image might mean in terms of aesthetic or social values. Whether it's made you think, for example, about new audiences, or
I think when institutions think about new audiences, that's very interesting to artist parents, because there could be drop-in crashes, so that I could look at the images that I'm interested in, because my child is interested in very different kinds of images, and I have to respect that, like Paw Patrol, moving images. Also, something preparing this panel I thought about is that I'm really interested in my parents in terms of parenthood and the art world. They have reappeared often in my work. This is also my interest in shame, I think. They have done drawings for me, and they also come to my openings, stay very long, and are very visible in my work and in my life in the art world. And I don't know, Rachel Cusk wrote this book, A Life's Work, no? And I think when you bring your cute children to the art world, it's maybe a reason for pride, but when you start to bring your frail parents, it becomes visible that you are also a life's work, and and that I'm not that free, that I'm also a formed person, formed by my family, formed by the society I live in. So I think to think about one's own parents is maybe very interesting in relation to parenthood and the art world.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and this relates to what you were saying, Basim, about this generational shift. And I think that brings me back to perhaps going back to your show at St. Gallen, Camille. So your show is really looking at the subject of caring, of all the different carers that are in our lives as parents, so nannies, teachers, and you're really making the labor and the mechanisms of care that we all need very visible. So, for example, the contracts that we might need to make with a nanny, and many of the sculptures in your installation are kind of surrogates in a way for parents. I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about this show, and perhaps we can go back to some of your images we didn't get a chance to see at the start.
Yes, I mean the recent exhibition, one exhibition was called Mother Tongue, and had more focus on my relationship with sculpture and the pre-verbal. And then another exhibition was Wet Job, which was one step further, and it was more focusing on the idea of soft labor, but also wet job is also a crime, and the idea of the messiness, and also a little bit of the dark aspect around childhood and motherhood, because it's not there's a lot of trauma that resurface from your own childhood when you raise a child. There's also physical pain that brings new images, and I thought that I had already worked a little bit on this with the work we thought before, System of Attachment, the breastfeeding theories, and the sculpture, and I wanted to move a little bit away from that, and also I thought it's so difficult because the mother is so essentialized, and it's like Marguerite Duras who said the institution of motherhood is a monster. but mothering is not monstrous. And she said often she enjoyed mothering, but she had such a profound disgust of the institution of motherhood. And I felt very similar, that I had a combination of disgust also. And you were asking if I met resistance when I was doing work about the breast milk and the breast pump, this slightly disgusting object. Because there is a disgust in milk and there's a fascination in the milk, but the milk smells so bad when it gets bad. You know, it's really, there is this sense of the things around motherhood are this topic that are difficult to talk about there because they're so heavily charged with projection and also strong emotion. Also, it's an universal experience. We're all born, of women born, to quote Andrea Büttner, but we also all have trouble with our relationship with our own mother, including us who also are mothers and fathers. And so I was interested to talk about the labor of care that is not performed by a father or a mother. And also because it's the condition of the work, for me, is my nanny being able to take care of my own children. And I thought it's also maybe the only way to really talk about labor is when there is no biological link. Because why does care work is badly paid, very often undeclared? It's because it's considered a labor of love. And it's people consider, and we, all of us, tend to consider it's a given. It's something that we are entitled to. We are entitled to love, but it's not true. And so we need other people to care for, also even for our dogs, our plant. Like the label of care is so much work, actually, that we need to subtract it and delegate it. And I was interested in this character that we often are ashamed to talk about, which are the nannies, the babysitter, the dog sitter. It's very difficult for women in general to talk about their own nannies and their own babysitters. It's a mixture of jealousy and shame, and also because it's sometimes and very often the exploitation of another woman who's the condition of the freedom of the other. I mean, it's also, we didn't talk so much about the women's strike that's happening today, but one of the reasons women's strike has been so often not successful is because there's so much disparity between the social category of women. And in this category of women, the women who are in charge of maintenance, of domestic workers are the ones who are at the lowest level and at the most vulnerable level of society. So I was interested to make this visible, but also I didn't really know how to not be too much also impacted by my own history. And as I was working on the show, I realized that most of the figure have more of the vision of me as a child. The way I would look at the people who, like my maternelle teacher. So one of the sculpture in the back is called maternelle, which is a maternelle teacher. In France, we say maternelle, which means motherly, for the kita, for the daycare, for the first school, the first year of a school child. So it's interesting that even when it's government, like public, like school, we still call it maternelle, like motherly. We still use the figure of the mother. And this monster is always there. This monster of what we expect the woman to care for children, this whole range of expectation. And I think the show, Sweet Days of Discipline, is a little bit a way to celebrate the delegate care, but also maybe a way to kind of examine how we expect to be cared for, and maybe also the perversity of care, like the dependency we have for care and how difficult it is to recognize it.
Yeah. And now that you've made this labor of care needed very visible in your work, has this changed the way that institutions have been working with you? Are they more supportive of your practice?
Absolutely not. I tried to ask for different arrangement. I tried to ask for the hours of my nanny to be paid during installation. I've tried to ask more space for accommodation. I sometimes was able to get that. I never were able to manage to get the institution to pay for my partner flight ticket or train ticket. So I would say, I think right now we are in the level where talking about it it's interesting, and I'm glad to see so many people. But I would be curious, like how many curators and director of institution are here, and how many of them know about things that have already been talked about and written. Like Eti Judah wrote this book, How to Not Exclude Artist Parents, and
which is a manifesto that's freely available online and a very useful resource, and I highly recommend to all institutions and curators who want to work with parents. But I wanted to ask the same question to you, Basim. Do you make institutions aware that you are parents, and are they supportive when they do know that you are parent?
Not from the beginning, but if I feel like we're at a point in the conversation where I need to make it clear that this is not going to work. I have kids, and my life doesn't revolve around your expectations. There are other parts of my life that are very important to me, and more important than one exhibition. And I think it's, I try to do it in response to the situation. But yes, sometimes I don't think I ever got anything extra, or I'm calling it extra, it shouldn't be extra. But also I think because, what Camille was talking about is the first step to get this acknowledged, and to accept that a father needs to be as involved is also it's the second or the third step. But I think what I try to make clear is, if someone gives me a deadline that's unrealistic, I make it clear that I have a domestic life, I have children, and I would prefer to spend the evening with them and not working on what you expect to have in an unrealistic timeline. And that this is not going to work. And I propose what I think will work. Most of the time that works out, because I think people just don't think of these things for reasons I don't understand. But it has to be made clear. I think it's something that really should be talked about.
How about you, Andrea? Do you make institutions aware that you are a parent?
Yeah, and I have to say I've made very good experiences. Bergen Kunsthalle in Norway, they paid for childcare for me and travel for my family. Same with us. I have also very good experience with commercial galleries, that this was possible, that somebody could come with me, take care of my child. And one thing that I am yearning for is a residency that could accommodate family life. I was really thinking about the term Muße. In English it's leisure, thinking about this panel. This is something I'm lacking as a parent, no? Muße, leisure, And so how could a residency program be like that, maybe orientates itself that's similar to what academics can experience when they are on a research at Harvard, for example. Yeah, it's clear then that a dual career thing is in place, that children have a place where care is in place, and this is something that artists also need. In some residencies you get a desk and nothing else, no workshops and so on, but with family it's even more interesting. What could a place be like where I can work and my child is also taken care of and happy? And this is something that really state-funded residency programs, like the British School in Rome, like Goethe Institute residencies, where you can't bring your children, it's outrageous, I think.
These are all good points, and I'm going to open the floor in a second to questions, but I was going to do a last very quick round to ask if you had one wish for the art world to really be more accommodating for parents with children, to support your practice. What would this be?
I mean, yeah, I guess I wanted to go back to a previous question. Sorry. But about how you announce that you have children, what do you say? I wanted to say that recently, because my children are very small, I've had like the opportunity to tell like 3 people I was pregnant while I was doing a show, and 2 times I was say I'm pregnant too. So it was, but I mean it was people who metaphorically were pregnant of the exhibition and were worried I couldn't deliver in time. And so what I mean is that I think it's difficult for an institution that they feel kind of somehow a little bit threatened by the fact that you have all those things to do. And that as a start, I think assuming that people might have children and not having to ask specifically for an extra plane ticket or an extra train ticket, that it is a question that is being asked. Do you need somebody, do you have children, do you need somebody to take care? Because, I mean, there's people who don't have children, but they care for somebody who's sick as well. Absolutely. And we talk about children, but I mean, we also need to talk about disabilities. Yeah. Because it's not just a problem of parents. I think it's just a problem of accepting that not all artists have the same needs. And I think as a start, I like that would make me really happy if institution would just like do the first move and propose, even say like, do you have a special need? Do you need to have a nanny on site? Do you need to have childcare? Like this is a question that was never asked to me, and I wish it had been.
So making the care and access needs very clear from the start of any collaboration. How about you, Basim?
I think to start shifting the priorities a little bit of budgets, of shows, of exhibitions, whatever structure, biennials, that there should be, I mean, it's all about priorities. There should be some room for things like this to start with, when the budgets are being made. I would love to take my daughters with me to see how I install a show and to be in different openings and but also to take care of them so that I'm not like that. I'm also spending time with them, contributing as much as I want to their bringing up and giving them new experiences and getting them to know a part of my life that maybe they don't know that much about. So I think it's all about priorities in the end. I think the priorities have to shift for, do we have like maybe in the show, the mega show that we want to do we have 50 artists and not take care of these things, or do we maybe have 45 and take care of these things?
How about you, Andrea?
I can only echo what Camille said. I think this first step question is a beautiful idea.
On that note, this is a good moment to open up for questions to the audience.
But I wonder if Art Basel asked me the question when they invited me for this panel. I forgot now.
I think I did.
Yeah?
I hope I did.
Okay.
This lady at the front.
Hi, it's not so much a question, it's more an observation that I made. Listening to you, I felt that it became obvious to me that, maybe I felt that Basim, how you talked about your children was very much, you expressed so much joy about being a father, and for both of you, like me, women, having children, it is harder, I think, to say how joyous it is. And I just observed, or I find it interesting that being a mother and being an artist, like that there's trauma in the women, I guess, to how to articulate on a stage like this the joy of being a mother, or how to connect motherhood to a visibility in the art world. And you had a different approach to that, which is interesting because it comes from a different history of being a father or being a man, not so much connected to the aspect of care. It's just a comment. I don't have a question connected, or maybe you want to respond to this if you.
Well, actually, I was going to ask a follow-up question, which I didn't get a chance earlier, which was that yes, you express a lot of joy, and you've talked about how you collaborate with your daughters. Do you see them increasingly as collaborators? And that gives them visibility as well.
Of course, I mean, there are a lot of difficult daily events about raising children, about the whole thing. I think for me it's more about I try to really focus on what I want to contribute to their lives, and this somehow, brings me joy. But to see someone you love so much growing, going through hard times, but you're there, and it's like there's this conversation, there is always communication about these things. It's just an experience that I enjoy, with all of its complexities, with all of its layers, with all of its changes over time. I never imagined when I was younger what I would be like as a father, but when I became one, it's something also that you have to negate all the time. It's something that every day is a challenge. But and also with work, every day is a challenge with work, because having to come up with a new idea for work and to make the work while you're having a mini crisis at home is not easy. But I think I choose to focus on the things that bring me happiness within this context and this relationship.
Thank you. There's a question at the back.
I would like to respond a little bit to the lady who contributed a question just before. So my question to you is, do you think there's somehow a timidness to express, as women to express? I'm an artist, I have 3 children, and when I started 50 years ago, it was completely off the wall to be an artist and have children. And I wonder, I'm interested to see this difference between a female response now and you as a man. So my question is there some intimidation to express this part now that is more the soft part? Is there some reluctance there that one would not be taken seriously expressing that softer part, or that the joy of caring? I feel like I've done full circle in 50 years, but I just wondered how you as younger mothers feel. Is there an intimidation there to express a joyful part?
Okay, I'm just replying. I wanted to go back to why it's more difficult. I would say first that it's just more fresh, and also maybe we're just more in it, and it's just there's less distance. For example, the question whether I'm taking my children or not to installation is not even a question I'm asking myself. I just have to, and there's not really another option. And I want to say also that and it's a bit difficult to say those things without essentializing the woman body, the fact of giving birth, which is another topic which is also very difficult to talk to without finding archetype that we don't like. So I guess what I want to say is that the experience of carrying a child and in the body but also outside of the body, and then seeing the child becoming another being but having this very intense connection, is also an experience that brings like previous experience of your own childhood. And there's a physical pain, which is the delivery, which is the carrying the children, and there is also all the society expectation that even though you can have the most caring partner on earth, you can live in the most progressive city on earth, you can have a lot of money to get help, the struggle you face with the expectation of society will always be there. I just opened this show in St. Gallen, And we did the column Milky Ways in Republic magazine. And the first question the national TV asked me was, Marina Abramovic aborted several times because she said it would ruin her career. What do you think about that? And then what do? I'm a woman, she's a woman, she made her own choice. It's difficult for us women to talk about our experience without stepping or risking to offend or, trigger trauma from other women, the women who don't have children, the women who couldn't have children, the women who lost children. Many of us also who have children have lost children. The question of miscarriage is also a question that we women in the end have, something that is difficult to share, it's even difficult to talk about, it's even not like really. I've recently talked to a friend of mine and we're talking about our miscarriage. She had a miscarriage in our own opening. I had a miscarriage the day of the birthday of my first child. Another friend of mine had a miscarriage in a plane going to China to open an exhibition she curated. I'm saying, like, it's true, there is a lot of trauma for women, and it's a trauma that maybe men are experiencing in a less intense way, and it's not something very easy and pleasant to say. We are different, and it's true that there is this intensity. And I want to say something else about how the shyness, I don't feel shy about talking about love, and my love for my child is very invading. In the drawing, there's a lot of drawings that we passed them fast, but there's also drawing that shows a more positive aspect, like the way the children is always in your brain, and the way it's almost like when you're freshly in love and you're 16 and you just met somebody you're passionately in love with and you constantly want to talk about this person or make drawings about this person or do something that connects you to this person, and it becomes a little bit obsessive. But it is true that for women artists, talking about your own children, showing baby pictures has been frowned upon for so long that, how could we feel confident about doing those things? This is not on us to kind of build that confidence. It's also for the world to change around us to be able to do those things. And then also the idea of maternity has been so often portrayed as ecstatic and happy that we need more images about postpartum depression. We need to talk about the frequency of suicide among young mothers. It's the main cause of death of women after 30s is postpartum suicide. And this is a topic of societies that are completely taboo. So I feel like as an artist, I'm more interested to talk about the things that are less talked about.
Thank you so much for these very poignant reflections, which I think are a very good conclusion to this panel. I would like to really thank our three panelists for speaking so openly about this topic, which is, as you can see, very sensitive and where there's still a lot to be improved socially. And I think we've got lots of ideas to think about in terms of making care and access needs more visible, shifting priorities, and supporting artists in terms of time and space. So thank you everybody for coming. Please do give our speakers another round of applause and see you at the next conversation.